Mitch.
We love good Cougars.
Mitch Harper.
Welcome on in, Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com. I'm your BYU Insider, Mitch Harper. Happy as always to have you on board of the podcast wherever you may be listening. Appreciate you taking the time to check out the show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at high noon Mountain Time. Cougar Tracks streams live on the KSL Sports Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages, giving you the latest dish in the world of BYU athletics. So I appreciate you for taking the time to check out the show. As always, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the show on all major podcasting platforms, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, and also the KSL Sports app. So here's what we got on deck for today's edition of the Cougar Tracks podcast. Today, happy birthday to KSL NewsRadio. It's the 100th birthday for the legacy home of the BYU Cougars. I'll share my thoughts on the memories I have of KSL NewsRadio and being a privileged individual to work at such a iconic radio brand. I'll share my thoughts on that. BYU football is a top 10 team in a post-spring top 25. Is that way too high? I'll share my thoughts on that. They also got a transfer portal commitment out of Sione Veikoso from Arizona State. What does that mean for the offensive line room? We'll get into that. The latest with BYU basketball. And then introducing a new segment to the program, Friday 5. A list of 5 things every week here on Cougar Tracks. And this week, I'll be diving into the 5 2023 football recruits that I feel BYU football needs to land in this recruiting cycle. But we start things off with KSL NewsRadio. It's its 100th birthday. And Cougar fans watching this show or listening to the program on the podcast, KSL NewsRadio is iconic with BYU sports. It's the legacy home of BYU athletics. Since 1951, KSL NewsRadio has been airing BYU sporting events. 1951. The first, to my knowledge, from what I've researched and found, was the 1951 NIT games that men's basketball won. They won the NIT title that year. That was the first time BYU games were on KSL NewsRadio, and it's been an incredible marriage ever since. I'm blessed to work on KSL NewsRadio, having or hosting Cougar Sports Saturday. It's quite the honor for me as someone who grew up as a huge fan of KSL NewsRadio from the sports side. When it comes to news, I remember as a kid, I was 13 years old, driving with my parents or my mom during 9/11. That was surreal. And I remember that whole day. That was just really crazy to see all of or hear all of that. And KSL NewsRadio was a big piece to all of that. So 9/11, and then also all of the BYU football events. I remember as a kid in 1996, I had to go to a scout event. I was in the Wolf Pack or whatever. My mom was like, you got to go and support your den or your Wolf Pack, whatever it was. Went to Hogle Zoo. It was during BYU versus New Mexico, 1996. My dad had tickets to the game. He was going to take me, but my mom's like, you got to go to the support your den or whatever that nonsense was. I was ticked. Anyway, I take this my first Sony little radio box, and I listen to KSL NewsRadio to hear BYU defeat New Mexico in 1996. But KSL NewsRadio has been a big part of BYU sports. I remember driving home with my dad in 1999 after the Washington game in 1999, Luke Staley's debut. And I remember Paul James basically right there and then anointed Luke Staley as the next big thing. And I agreed. I mean, it was just an amazing thing. Radio is such an intimate medium, and there's been so many talented broadcasters come through KSL NewsRadio, and to think it's 100 years old now. It's the oldest radio station west of the Mississippi. It's pretty cool. And I have the privilege to host a weekly show with Matt Baiamonte, noon to 3, every Saturday on KSL News Radio. So I'm pretty lucky. I'm blessed. And I remember sitting in the stands as a fan and seeing on the press box KSL 1160 on the press box. That was back then when there was nothing on the box. There was no banners for bowl games, no painted towers. It was just the press box and KSL 1160. It's an iconic brand. I also remember too, one of the cool memories I had in 2005. I remember that was KSL has always been ahead of the curve on things. They were one of the first entities to start the podcasting game. In 2001, I think as early as then, KSL was launching podcast. And you think about the podcast platform now, the medium now, like this one you're listening to, everyone's got a podcast these days, but 20 years ago, no one did. KSL was ahead of the curve. But I remember in 2005, Greg Wrubell basically was kind of the guy on the air that flipped the switch where KSL became an FM station too, 102.7 FM. And I remember You Punt, You Die. James Dye was the sideline reporter. Mark Lyons was the color analyst. A lot of great memories with KSL News Radio. And again, I get a happy birthday to KSL, all the great people on the staff, Kevin LaRue, program director, 100 years of KSL. It's pretty remarkable. And I'm so lucky to say I'm a little sliver of that station, which is such an iconic institution in radio. Because I'll tell you, the reach of KSL, it's real, it's tangible. And I've felt it ever since I've been working with KSL since 2019. But again, just wanted to wish a happy birthday to KSL News Radio. You can share your comments on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, if you're watching, your memories of KSL, maybe the lengths you've went to as a BYU fan to listen to a game on KSL. There's been times where I had camping trips as a kid and with scout camps again. It was always a theme with scouts. I don't know what it was, but I could pick up the KSL radio signal up in the mountains as well. It was always pretty cool. BYU football had some cool news yesterday. They got a commitment from Sione Veikoso, Arizona State offensive tackle, committed to the Cougars. 6'7", 325 pounds. This guy's legit. He's young. He's kind of a developmental guy, but I think he's got a huge future ahead of him in the BYU football program. Listen to this real quick too. So you add Sione Veikoso, and he entered the transfer portal officially earlier this week after the May 1st deadline. But from what I've gathered, his paperwork was submitted to Arizona State's compliance office before May 1st. So he is eligible to play this year. He's got 4 years of eligibility remaining in his collegiate career. So you got a redshirt freshman from a Power 5 program who was trying to compete for a starting role at ASU this season. But here's the offensive line room for BYU in 2022, and I'm breaking it down by class. So from senior all the way down to freshman. This is the personnel snapshot that I have according to my records right now. So your seniors, Joe Tukuafu, Keanu Saliapaga. Not bad. Juniors, and a lot of these guys are fourth-year players. Again, with the COVID year, it makes it a little bit confusing. But for the heck of it, we'll say juniors right now. Harris LaChance, Braden Keim, Blake Freeland, Clark Barrington. Those are some studs. All those guys right there have starting experience. And if they wanted, they could come back in the first year of the Big 12 Conference. Sophomores, Seth Willis, Connor Pay, Campbell Barrington, and then Lasai Latai, who comes in from Snow Junior College. He's got 3 years of eligibility remaining. Then here's your freshman for 2022. Kingsley Suamataia, you know all about him, Oregon transfer. Donovan Hanna, Dylan Rollins, Hunter Hill, Sione Veikoso, Brock Gunderson, Tyler Little, and then some of the true freshmen, Sonny Macassini, he was part of spring ball. Cooper McMullen, he's a redshirt guy. Sam Daw transferred in from Idaho State. Chandler Bird, and then the true freshman expected to be part of the program in fall camp. We'll see. Just the numbers are really tight. Vi Soifua from Orem, and then Peter Falanico from St. George. Loaded offensive line room. You get Sione Veikoso added from Arizona State. You just added to a already experienced and talented group. He was an important get, though, because let's say you lose Freeland to the NFL next year, and if he's a potential first, second-round guy, you got to go. He could be a guy in 2023 in the first year of the Big 12 that's contending for a starting spot. You also got Campbell Barrington as well. Braden Kimes got starting experiences. Aaron Roderick was right coming out of spring ball where he said that is the one position, without a doubt, they're Big 12 ready. Offensive line room for BYU is Big 12 ready. And Veikoso added to the mix only emphasizes that. I got a full roundup on the transfer portal commitments and Veikoso's commitment to BYU up on KSLSports.com. BYU basketball transfer portal latest. Still waiting on word of Antoine Davis. He's going to commit somewhere on Monday. Also waiting word on Rudy Williams. So we'll see what ends up happening there with those prospects, two of the top guys for BYU out of the transfer portal. But, I think that with BYU, there's also another guy to keep an eye on too, Joe Petrakis from Western Carolina. He's apparently been contacted by BYU, and he's a former teammate of Rudy Williams. If BYU gets Rudy Williams, this guy could be interesting to watch. He was a 6'10", or is a 6'10" forward who played a year at Kansas State. Then he went to Western Carolina. He's got a connection to Rudy Williams, so maybe that could be something where BYU kicks the tires there, potentially on that transfer portal. But it's kind of a waiting game right now for Rudy Williams and Antoine Davis. We're all waiting till the start of the BYU football season. 120 days from today, BYU will open up the season against South Florida on September 3rd in Tampa, where Tom Brady, his home, he finally admits after 20 years that he fumbled. As a Raider fan, I did not appreciate that. I was kind of getting on board with Tampa Tom. Finally getting around to liking Tom Brady. But then he finally admits that he fumbled. And the whole trajectory there, he would have been sent to the bench. It would have been Drew Bledsoe. Anyway, Raider fans, we just can't get over it. When he dropped that TikTok, it just set triggers. Anyway, but BYU, September 3rd, 120 days from today, they'll be playing South Florida. BYU, as a preseason ranked team, where will they be ranked? Will they be ranked? Well, according to USA Today, if they were in charge of the rankings, they would have BYU at number 9. Number 9 in the post-spring, way too early, top 25 from USA Today. That's a bit rich for me. I'll have the KSL Sports post-spring top 25 up next week with our KSL Sports staff. Right now, I've got BYU at 16. And I think that's pretty fair. Back-to-back years, double-digit wins, tons of returning experience. But I struggle to say BYU is a top 10 team when there's so many questions in the trenches on the defensive side. Defensive line is where I have questions about BYU the most right now. I think offensively, I don't have many questions at all. Running back, you could say, is a question mark because Chris Brooks hasn't led BYU. Lopini Katoa, he's had years where he's been the leading rusher, but is he an RB1? I don't think anyone's assuming that. Jax McChesney's had spot duty against USC and UMass and things like that, but it's, could he be an actual factor into the running back room on a consistent basis week in and week out? So you can make the case that running back is a question, especially losing your single season rushing leader. But to me, the biggest question mark for BYU is in the trenches on the defensive side. I like the personnel that BYU has along the defensive line. I always have. There's so much continuity returning. You only lose Lopa Leatawa from BYU's defensive line. That's it. I mean, everyone else from last season returns. And you know how high I am on Tyler Batty. I think he's a phenomenal talent. I think he's an NFL talent. I think Batty's big time. But is it just simply everyone returns is naturally going to make that defensive line group better? I think it's kind of a wait and see approach. I think there's an argument to be made that BYU is a top 10 team maybe going into next season. It would be interesting to see how they would be viewed had they beat UAB. Not that UAB is some world beater. Not that that would have been a perception shifter, beating UAB, as I wear my Independence Bowl jacket. But had they beat UAB, you would have been an 11-win football team, back-to-back years of 11 wins. Maybe there would have been a little bit of more of a national push for BYU to be a top 10 team. I just still think when you talk about top 10 teams, I think you're always great in the trenches. BYU is elite on the offensive trench. Elite. I think they could be the best offensive line maybe in the country. They could potentially be that. I believe that. I don't think that's too hot of a take with the personnel I just reeled off. Defensive line, though, I've got questions. And that's why I wouldn't put BYU in the top 10 going into next season. And I think this is going to be a fascinating dynamic, too, for a Kalani Sitake coach team to handle this much hype. Think about it. Every year in the Kalani Sitake era, there's been nowhere near this hype. I think they're going to be a lock to be a top 25 preseason team. And that should be a given. It shouldn't even be a debate. I think with enough of these media outlets putting BYU very high in the AP top 25 or these way too early polls, BYU is going to be in the preseason AP top 25. Kalani Sitake's program has never had that happen before. How will they handle expectations and pressure like that? Usually it's been expectations are relatively low. Last year, the expectations were, okay, you beat a bad schedule with Zach Wilson, a number 2 quarterback, a generational talent. You're going to probably fall in line to back to 7-5, 8-4. Everyone was proven wrong. Jaron Hall was fantastic, and BYU reeled off a 10-win regular season. How will Kalani's team handle pressure and expectations now? I think one of my worries for BYU, I've said this before on some of my radio hits that I've done on the Zone and KSL NewsRadio, is that there's always a game or two in the Kalani era each season where you go, that should not have been a loss. You can't lose that game. And you think to yourself, where is that game potentially this year for BYU? Because I think the schedule's tougher this year than last. Last year, you played more P5s, but I thought the P5s were weaker last season. You don't have a cellar dweller like an Arizona on this year's schedule. Washington State was just a middle-of-the-road Power 5 team. These P5 teams on BYU's schedule this year, they're all in these way too early top 25s. Think about this. Baylor checking in on USA Today's way too early post-spring top 25 at number 12. Notre Dame in Vegas, number 13. Oregon, number 14. Arkansas, number 21. The quality of the schedule is much tougher. Arkansas could be a team that takes a step back. Like BYU, they're not used to expectations placed on them. They could take a step back. I think Oregon's a little bit of a overhyped team right now, just because Dan Lanning comes in from Oregon, Georgia, DC, first-time head coach. That's a little bit of a learning curve. That's a big learning curve. I don't think you can just assume because they've had some really good recruiting classes, not elite, but really good. You can't just assume they're top 25 just because of that. The Oregon team I saw last year at season's end was downright horrendous. They were terrible. So I don't think you can just assume they're preseason top 25, but that brand and going on the road, that's a tough game for BYU. I would have BYU in kind of the top 16 range is where I would have them. That's just me. USA Today post-spring top 25, BYU checked in at number 9. BYU checked in the top 7 for one of the top recruits in the state and on BYU's 2023 recruiting board. Hunter Clegg, edge rusher from American Fork High School, 2023 recruit. This kid's big time. He released his top 7 schools. He trimmed down the list, got a ton of offers. BYU's in the top 7. Here's his top 7, no particular order. You got to, note the typical recruiting trends. Utah, LSU, USC, BYU, Baylor, Auburn, Stanford. It's one heck of a list. That's a really good list. Clegg is a guy that's had a meteoric rise. The talent's been there. He had a visit to BYU, an unofficial visit during spring practices back in March. He was there with Walker Lyons. He was there with Smith Snowden. A huge contingent of BYU recruits at that spring practice. And there was the one where Andy Reid was there talking to the BYU football team. Hunter Clegg would be massive. And to me, this goes into a news segment on the program, the Friday Five, a list of 5 things each Friday here on the Cougar Tracks podcast. And this week, I'm giving you the 5 guys who I think BYU needs to land in 2023. Now, this is just my list of dudes, guys that I really like in this 2023 recruiting class. It's not necessarily the highest rated guys. It's because I'll tell you, the 2023 recruiting class is going to be fun for Cougar fans. There's going to be a lot of high-end prospects that BYU is going to pursue. And in June, when the summer camps start rolling in, that's going to be interesting to see how BYU as a Big 12 program handles summer camps, because typically that's always been where you get the bull rush of commitments, where you get about 6 to 8 guys committed in about 4 or 5 days. Do they take a little bit more of a methodical approach to kind of wait and see things out now that you're a P5 team? I mean, if some of these dudes I'm going to mention say they're going to commit, they're taking the commitment right away. But sometimes they would take commitments from guys that were just kind of off the beaten path in the recruiting world because they liked him at the camp, and they would just pounce on the offer of those kids and they would commit. I think there might be a little bit more of a wait and see approach on some of that coming out of the summer camps this June. But these are the 5 guys that I just really like. That's really what it comes down to. It's not necessarily the 5 highest rated guys, but I think these would be dudes that would make BYU's 2023 recruiting class really, really good. Hunter Clegg is one of those guys. I love watching Hunter Clegg. His highlight footage on Huddle is fantastic. Anytime you can get an elite edge rusher, you got to strive to get that guy. And Clegg, I think, is one of the best edge rushers out west, and his offer sheet bears that out. I think he's got room to grow in his body too, and I think that it's interesting too. You think about the edge rushers in the pipeline for BYU. John Henry Daly from Lone Peak, he was a great one coming out of Lone Peak High School. He's going to be big, big, big time. I talk about big time all the time, but John Henry Daly, keep an eye on that guy. He's still got another year on his mission. But Clegg, next in line. If you could get Hunter Clegg to BYU, that'd be a huge get for the Cougars. I also like Sione Veikoso, linebacker from Timpview. He's in the top 247 in the composite ratings. A linebacker, 4-star recruit, number 223 or 228, by 24/7 Sports in the industry standard composite ratings. Sione Veikoso, linebacker. I mentioned it before. I think the linebacker spot is an area where I like the talent in 2022, but 2023 and beyond, who are the next wave of guys? Who are the next big alphas, the next stars at linebacker for BYU in the Big 12 era? Maybe Sione Veikoso could be that guy eventually for BYU. I also like this kind of, maybe off the beaten path, but I really like Ryder Burton, quarterback out of Springville. BYU offered Burton last month, and unranked kid, not rated by any of the recruiting services, but I like this kid. Watching his huddle after BYU offered him, I thought he was an impressive arm talent. I think he's got room to grow. It's kind of a similar trajectory to a Zach Wilson type, where under the radar guy, but the coaching staff sees something in Burton and they offered him as a QB. It'll be interesting to see if more schools continue to show interest or extend those offers to Ryder Burton, especially coming out of summer, because I think BYU's in a spot where they could get him maybe. And I think he'd be a great get. The 2023 class needs to get a quarterback. There was that flirtation a little bit with Jaden Rashada. That matriculated to nothing as Roman Rashada decommitted, and then they're moving on. And Jaden Rashada is traveling coast to coast. He's making every visit known to man. He's a star talent. I mean, he's going to be a 5-star recruit, one of the best quarterback prospects in the class of 2023. But I think a guy like Ryder Burton, if Aaron Roderick sees something in a guy at quarterback, I think who's anyone to question that, right? And watching Ryder Burton's huddle after BYU offered, I'm going to make sure to check out some Springville games in person this year. I like Ryder Burton. I'm very curious to see how he continues to progress as a QB this year. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on him. Obviously, a star talent that any school would be thrilled to have is this next guy, Walker Lyons, tight end. You name a school, he's got an offer from them. I mean, that position is where you feel like BYU can get blue chip talent. I sometimes question BYU's ability to maybe get the blue chip talents at wide receiver and running back. I feel like they can get the blue chip talents there in the portal, but typically it seems like BYU's been more of a developmental spot at those positions, or they get kids that have strong in-state roots and strong ties to the church, and they go to BYU. But I think that Walker Lyons, the tight end spot, that's an area where BYU can get blue chip talent. They always have been able to. Tight end position has a great history at BYU. And Walker Lyons, he was tweeting at Hunter Clegg after his top 7 reveal. And like I said, they were together when they were on their visit in March to BYU. They also went and checked out Utah as well. But Walker Lyons would be a monster talent. I mean, he's got ties to BYU, LDS kid. There was a quote he had to 24/7 Sports where he mentioned the facilities are not the greatest, and that's just fact. I think it's right. I mean, BYU's got to step it up in the facilities game. This kid's going to be wined and dined by the finest schools in the country. And if they could land him, it'd be huge for BYU, because I think with the tight end spot, you got Dallin Holker, you got Isaac Rex. Both of those guys maybe could be NFL prospects next year. Who's the next great tight end? Ethan Erickson's in the pipeline. You know, Lane Lunt's still around. Carter Wheat. Mason Wake's kind of a wing tight end, fullback, but they need that next big star. And that could be Walker Lyons. And then my final guy, number 5, Siraz Bunkum. Athlete, wide receiver, 6'4", out of Mater Dei High School. He's got offers from Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno. I just like this kid. I love that kind of under the radar recruit out of Southern California, skill guy. I think BYU is the type of school that has the platform that can make these guys into star athletes. And if they perform well, they got the opportunities for NIL. I think he would be a nice kid for BYU. I think if I was in charge of recruiting, it would just be a bunch of athletes, man. Just guys with speed. I'd be like the Al Davis model. Just, okay, what's your 40? You're running a 4.38. Okay, I'll offer you. Just speed, baby. Give me the speed. That's all I want. That's my 5 guys that I want, and I feel BYU needs to get in the class of 2023 in recruiting. So there you go. I'll have a full piece up on that here on KSLSports.com, so you can check that out there. Got a question in on the live stream. Again, if you watch the show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at high noon on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you can chime in with your comments throughout the show. Nathan Jones writes, with the new additions to the support staff that was announced earlier this week, how does BYU compare to other Big 12 schools? So I actually looked at this, Nathan. BYU, by my count, has 42 individuals part of the football staff. And there could be others that are maybe part of the football staff from like the medical side, trainers. So, but on BYU's official website, their football staff, they got 42 people. Baylor, the Big 12 champion, on their official staff list, they got 46. So making inroads, improving, but still a little bit of ways to go. The thing is, too, is that you look at other programs in college football out in the SEC. Billy Napier at Florida, he's got 75 guys. Will that become the new norm in college football? Getting a staff of 70, 80 people? We'll see. But BYU is getting closer. If they're within striking distance of the Big 12 champ Baylor Bears, I think that's a good footing before they get to the Big 12. And you got to imagine they're going to be having a few more guys or guys, gals, whatever it may be, added to the staff before 2023. Kalani Sitake said he's not done. Takes time at BYU. Things take time at BYU. There's no doubt about that. I appreciate all of you taking the time to watch the show today. And also for you listeners, downloading the show on the Cougar Tracks podcast feed. It's been a pleasure doing these live streams on the feed with all of you. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'll be back on Monday recapping the weekend and talking all the latest in the world of BYU athletics and BYU football. I'm going to have a fun piece coming up next week talking about the greatest helmets of all time in BYU football history. I'm kind of looking forward to that. I'm sure the new BYU equipment coaches or staffers will appreciate that as well. But appreciate all of you checking out the show and listening to the podcast. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating and a review. You can also ask any of your questions in your reviews of the program, and I'll get to those. I'll check out the reviews, and then I'll ask those questions and answer those here on the podcast. And again, it's always Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at high noon. So I'll talk to you Monday here on the Cougar Tracks podcast. It's always powered by KSLSports.com.